I'm Dianne Dillon-Ridgley, and when I'm asked to introduce myself, I always remember being a math major and saying a line has a point. I'm the point, and I'm in this world. I'm at this point as a daughter and as a mother. And the powerful thing about math is no matter where you put that point on that line, it is infinite in each direction. And I feel the collective of daughters and mothers coming to bear on this moment in time because we must now mother Earth. We have for years waxed eloquent and lyrical about how much we always love Mother Nature, how much we love our mothers, how we put them on a pedestal. And I always remember what Gloria Steinem said, a pedestal, like all small spaces, is very confining. And what we have done to Mother Nature has been confining too. We've just taken natural resources. We've used things as if there are no limits, but there are limits. And clearly, with what we have seen with thousand-year floods, there's no such thing as a fire season. It just is ongoing. All of this has moved us to a point where we must respond, we must act, we must take action. I thought back to who was one of the first public figures that had an impact on me. And it was as a girl, just moving into puberty, I first read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And it touched me. It touched me as much from the poetry as it did from the imagery of what would it be like if there were no birds, songs that so lift us up, if we couldn't see the streams and the water flowing and nourishing us. All of this abundance has been given to us, but not just to use, but to take care of it, to respect it. I remember as a little child, 3 or 4 years old, I'd be asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? I always had 2 answers. I wanted to be a ballerina. I had just started taking ballet lessons, and I wanted to be a mother. I spent some 20 years dancing, and I have the knees to prove it, but I also was blessed with 2 amazing children. Now, I've pulled a picture of when Karima and Desal were young. They are now full-grown adults, and they're part of this process too. But I think each of us has to find, why is it that you are connected and so committed to addressing this? I've spent a 40-year plus career working on human rights, civil rights, a fundamental understanding of justice and democracy. We now call it environmental justice. But the reason I wanted to name this first of this series, It's Time to Mother Earth, is because there's a particular role for the feminine. We need to think through how we have set up patriarchal institutional structures, vertical ways of ranking things that have become now toxic to us in terms of what we do, as the very toxins that we talk about that have polluted our streams and our air. I often get asked, Dianne, why do you start so much with this gender perspective? Well, for one thing, we have littered the earth for several centuries, at least since the Industrial Revolution, and now we've got to clean it up. Women have been cleaning stuff up for a millennium. So, it's time to mother? It's part of respect. It's part of understanding that we have agency, that all of us have standing when it comes to being responsible and engaged to do this. In fact, it is imperative that we understand we all have standing, because the decisions that are going to be made now are going to impact everyone. It's time to Mother Earth. It's almost the same as the intuition. You go, you seek professional help, or you seek a physician or some sort of diagnostic capacity. And they say, well, I can't find anything's wrong. Just go home and be happy. But something is wrong. It's that in your heart, that in your chest intuition that tells you, we may not yet know what to do or what it is, but we know that there's something wrong. And clearly, we're at a point where in our society, in our communities, we're carrying pain. What if we did things differently? Look, we know that the planet itself, short of some humongous explosion, is going to be here. The question is, will we be here? Will it be able to support our lives? Will we be able to continue? And that's why I said the real challenge, climate change issues are the tasks that we must address. The mission and the challenge is for us to live sustainably on Earth. I was very fortunate to have Bella Abzug, who was a Congress member and an incredibly strong female presence. Despite her stature, she had a booming voice, and she did everything out of love. And as a literal mentor, and I was at her hospital bedside the night before her final surgery, she had tasked me with several things. And after the Earth Summit in 1992, where over, I think, 40,000 people gathered in Rio to really address issues of biodiversity and how are we going to save the Earth for ourselves, we began to notice, particularly as we talked to women around the world, something was going on in terms of making connections between women's cancers and what was changing industrially or in the environment in terms of water systems, materials that were being used. And Bella asked me to start Women, Cancer, and the Environment. And so between the time of the Earth Summit in 1992 and the Fourth World Congress for Women, which was in Beijing, we had a series of gatherings, not unlike the cancer clusters, which were negative. We had women's empowerment clusters. So one of the things we began to see, part of my job was to analyze what had changed. And one thing that was very critical when they changed from traditional copper piping to PVC piping, you began to see a timeline where you had an outbreak of women's breast cancers. But one thing that really happened that made a difference, you had a lot more women become pathologists. And that was striking. So I remember even a piece in the New York Times was talking about these female pathologists who had on their own begun to say something's going on. The histologies of these tumors is different. Instead of breast cancer being a post-menopausal disease in women, we were seeing increases that did not fit the historic track in terms of premenopausal women, and particularly African American and Hispanic or Latinx and Latino women, as we now say. So we began to bring all of this information together. We gathered people like Susan Love and others who were surgeons as well as internists, OB-GYNs who were looking at all of this information. And we really put together 2 global conferences. We engaged people like Akiko Daboto-san from Japan, who was part of WEDO, the Women's Environment and Development Organization. We had Vandana Shiva, or Chief Bisi from Nigeria, or Wangari Maathai from Kenya. Incredible women who, in their own communities, in their own places, also had demonstrated courage and fierceness to resist the institutional power that said, you're just a woman, you're just a mother. And not unlike the ways we saw in the United States, when a decision was made to supposedly change a water source, to save some money. And long term, not only has it not saved money, it's exposed a whole host of infrastructure that needs to be addressed. But worst of all, lead. Children were exposed to lead. And what do we know? We know that lead cannot be chelated. Those young people will have a body burden of lead for the rest of their lives. So we have become veterans and have been drafted into an army of resisting an onslaught of, since World War II, exposures to toxins and substances which have compromised and deteriorated our capacity to live full and abundant lives. And it's now at a point where it's critical. So I'm not jumping to climate change. I want you to understand, we have gotten here by seriously examining all of these smaller, subtle changes. I mean, the advent of pesticides. Well, up until at least 1987, by most assessments, you continued to have an increase in agricultural production. That at best topped out then, and since then, we've continued to add more and more, but sometimes more and more does less and less, but it exposes us to more and more. We've had such a track record and a history, particularly during the Industrial Revolution, of being able to solve problems, and I will say oftentimes an arrogance. We spent a lot of time channeling the Mississippi River until we realized that there's now a dead zone in the Delta. I live in Iowa. Well, I remember being after the Horizon incident or accident and looking at the sediment. I remember standing there and somebody was saying, well, look, you're standing on all this new land. And I said, yes, it's unfortunate, but it's old land from Iowa that has been shunted down the length of the Mississippi. And unfortunately, we have not appreciated and recognized what we are doing, but we do now. So I just want to go back to a moment to what happened with the women, cancer, and the environment. We named ourselves Rachel's Daughters as an homage and as an appreciation to all that Rachel Carson did and the courage that it took. If you go back and read what was written about her in the late 1950s and the early 60s, I mean, they said she wasn't a real woman anyway. First of all, she didn't have the credentials to be writing about what she was writing about. She wasn't a real woman anyway. She had a barren womb. She hadn't had any children. She's trying to do this because she's jealous of your women who are fecund. I've been in 6 or 7 countries where I've heard exactly the same statement put forward in order to prevent the engagement of women standing up and speaking for themselves. And in the same way that has happened with women, it has also happened with marginalized groups, with communities. So I use the specter of the 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years of women being marginalized because it shows us what historically has been the same pattern that has happened to communities. When someone is perceived as not having power, those who are the status quo, who have a vested interest in perpetuating the situation, often we attach to it greed, whatever phrase you want to use. But it is for them to continue to extract, to control. We make these decisions and people talk about money, and I am not naive. I've spent too many years serving on corporate boards and other things. I get that. I really do. But we can't continue to make decisions that only look at that aspect and ignore the reality. Some of you who are as old as I am remember a commercial where they were talking about butter and margarine, and it was Mother Nature. And she said, it's not nice to fool Mother Nature. Well, the reality is you can't fool Mother Nature. Mother Nature will fool you. So how do we look at this poignant moment in time, this ethical clarion call for us to step up and be responsible for us not to address this with guilt, but with honesty and integrity and courage. Courage. I think of Maya Angelou. She said, you can have all the other wonderful virtues that you want, but you can't practice them if you don't first have the courage to stand up and tell the truth, to pull back the scabs. The scar can be healed, but it can only be healed if we face the truth. And so I almost want to close on this video with where we began, thinking about it's time to Mother Earth, because the one thing that your mother will do is tell you the truth. She will not let you off the hook. You could come home and say, well, how was school today? What happened? And you say, fine. No. What happened? Tell me. And when things go wrong in your life, who can you always come to and tell them? Because at the end of the day, it is about love. And I think through all of the years of nonviolence in terms of what we euphemistically call the civil rights movement, and one of my favorite works by Alice Walker is Anything We Love Can Be Saved. It is time for us to Mother Earth. It is time for us to stand up and show the love that we have, that we are committed to learning how and to acting up to living sustainably on Earth. And to do that, we have to respect the standing of all of the multiplicity of animals and creatures and plants. I think of Chief Oren Lyons, who said, my brother is in the rock. Or John S. Mbiti, who for me was, my grandfather is in the tree. It sounds like poetry. It sounds metaphoric, but sometimes the deepest truths are buried or treasured inside what moves us and motivates us is art. We are at a moment in time where so much is coming together. It is an opportunity. It is a responsibility. It is a clarion call for us to meet this moment. And I know we can.